For the first time in 2026, the UFC returns to the UFC Apex, which a lot of people have been against over the last couple of years since they started doing shows there back in 2022, mainly because of COVID. But they're actually adding a bunch of new seats, so there will be more of a crowd at the Apex this weekend than you guys are used to seeing. Now, as somebody that's been to the Apex, it's a phenomenal viewing experience, and I heard that ticket prices are now going from anywhere from $250 to $600. And obviously, from the outside looking in, a lot of people are going to be against it, but I would highly recommend going to check out an event there, as a live viewing experience is pretty freaking cool. I got to be honest, from the TV portion, or at least the broadcast version, I can see why other people would be against the UFC holding fights at the Apex, but as a live viewing experience, it is phenomenal. There's nothing like it in the world, and I'm sure adding the amount of seats that they've added now will probably add to the atmosphere a little bit more. But this weekend, the UFC will be headlining this card with a bantamweight clash between Mario Bautista and the streaking and ever-entertaining Vinicius Oliveira. In the co-main event, we got Amir Albazi taking on Kyoji Horiguchi, who's coming off a dominating performance over Tagir Ulanbekov. It's a decent card all in all, especially considering that we're coming off back-to-back numbered events for the UFC. But this event will take us into the first off weekend for the UFC, but they will be returning with an event every single weekend all the way up until at least April 11th as of now, which is what the schedule reads. So let's try to take in as much MMA as we can this weekend. Just a quick reminder, there's also PFL going down this weekend, and I will have a full card breakdown for that on Thursday, so stay tuned for that. And then we also have LFA going down, and I'll have the Legacy Warriors podcast dropping for you guys on probably Thursday as well. I'll try to do Wednesday for PFL and then Thursday for LFA, but it just comes down to how much time I have on my hands. And then the last thing, I'm a man of the people. I'll listen to what you guys want. I've already added the full prop segment to the end of Best Bets, which usually drops on Thursday, but somebody asked for recaps as well. Some of you guys missed the recaps, so I'll do recaps at the ending of the podcast. I just want to do a quick blurb at the beginning of podcasts, but not waste too much time getting right into the breakdowns, which is what the majority of viewers want. So that's exactly what we're going to do moving forward. Recaps at the ending of every MMA Lockcast episode. All right, let's get right into it. First fight of the night goes down in the women's bantamweight division, and we have a matchup here between Claudia Sygula, who comes in at -150, going up against Priscilla Cachoeira, who comes in at +130. Now, starting off on the Sygula side of things, she managed to get her hand raised for the first time in the UFC last time out, as she took on Irina Alexieva, and I believe she was a +200 underdog that night, and she was able to utilize a mobile striking game to really touch up Alexieva, bloody up her opponent's nose, and then she really hurt Alexieva in the third round, eventually got a takedown, and ended that fight off in top position, raining down big shots. That was a pretty good performance from Sygula, especially after the shellacking she took at the hands of Melissa Mullins in her UFC debut, where she got finished in the second round of that fight. Now, Sygula is normally a fighter that likes to utilize a grapple-heavy approach, and she does have an active submission game, but I still question her level of skill and whether she still deserves to be in the UFC. Of course, with a good enough game plan, you can defeat a low-level fighter like Alexieva, but as she continues to take steps up in competition and face more experienced opposition, we'll see whether she has what it takes to really cut it at this level. Now, she's going up against Priscilla Cachoeira, who's on a little bit of a slump, 1-3 over her last 4 fights. That one win coming at the unfortunate nature of Josiane Nunes, who ate a clean uppercut from Cachoeira and still showcased that the 37-year-old has the power to put women away. There are not many women at 125 pounds that can fight at this level. Sorry, not 125, 135 pounds that can throw with the type of power that Cachoeira does, and that's what's allowed her to hold on to this UFC roster spot. You even see, 5 fights ago, she had that win against Ariane Lipski where she knocked her out and really didn't show her much respect at all. Her game just does not evolve. She plods forward, she throws big winging hooks. Sometimes her durability holds up and that allows her to be more effective. Other times she gets clipped and put away, just like she did against Jocelyn Edwards last time. She also has a little bit of an issue in the grappling realm where opponents opponents have taken her to the ground, dominated her from that top position, and eventually got that submission. And that's where we see her flaws really start to show. But she is a tough out for the first 2 to 3 minutes. If you can't get her down initially, she will put that pace and pressure on you and try to get that knockout to try to get the win. Now here against Sygula, this is an intriguing matchup. I wouldn't trust Sygula at -150. She has not fought a power puncher like Cachoeira. We saw how many times Oleksiejczuk was able to hit Sygula, but Sygula did a good enough job with her footwork, pivoting, angling, and just perpetually staying on her bicycle so she didn't get clipped with anything too cleanly. But if Cachoeira is able to catch her with something, that could really throw a wrench in the plans of Sygula. I'm assuming once Sygula feels that power from Cachoeira, she's going to be looking for takedowns, and I think she might fail on the first few attempts, but if this fight's able to get into the second and third rounds, she might be able to find the takedown there, and I think she is active enough with her submission game that she could eventually find that finish here against Cachoeira. I like the plus money under 2.5 here. 9 out of the 12 UFC fights for Cachoeira have finished inside the distance, and this seems like a fight where she can pull that violent nature out, whether it's her catching Sygula with the big shot and knocking her out, or eventually getting taken down and submitted. I think a violent spot is more than capable of happening here. I'm going to go with the pull. I think Sygula gets the submission, but very low confidence. I would rather take the violent spot instead. All right, moving over to the next matchup here. It is another bantamweight matchup, but for the males, and it is between Muin Gafurov, who comes in at -120, and his opponent Jacob Wiklacz, who comes in at +100. Now, I'll start off on the Gafurov side of things, who started 2025 with a bang. A big upset victory over the -550 favorite and undefeated prospect at the time, Rinya Nakamura. Gafurov did a good job in terms of utilizing his footwork, his takedown defense, and big power shots to really hurt Nakamura, who we know is still working on his striking game, but is a high-level wrestler. There's really only one moment in the third round where we saw Gafurov go for a takedown, and we saw Nakamura reverse it in midair, end up on top, get a decent bit of control time, but Gafurov was able to work back to his feet and then land big shots once again, just as he was doing for the majority of that fight. He ended up clean sweeping Nakamura on the scorecards, which was, very surprising. That was a fight that I didn't get to watch live as I was out, being a human being. But upon rewatching it now properly, it was very impressive what Gafurov was able to do, especially in his previous fight against Cong, where he gave up a handful of takedowns, spent some time on his back, but eventually worked back to his feet and landed more significant damage, which ended up leading to him winning that fight and snapping that 2-fight losing streak he had. But he is a guy that's been quite underrated in his UFC career. I would, admit that I was kind of low on him as well, losing to John Castaneda and quickly getting submitted by Said Nurmagomedov. You can see some of the holes in his game. He's more of a power puncher with his striking rather than setting things up with combinations and the jab. His wrestling game is also not that bad either, but I think there are some shortcomings in his game that a lot of guys can take advantage of, just as we saw, like I said, Nurmagomedov and Castaneda do. Now he's going up against former KSW bantamweight champion Jacob Wiklacz, who pulled off a big upset of his own last time around as he was able to pick up a split decision win over Patchy Mix. Now we know Patchy gone over to Rizin. That was the last fight for Mix in the UFC, which was very underwhelming considering the amount of hype that Mix had coming into the UFC. We can give him a pass for the Mario Bautista loss, but he looked kind of slow and stuck in mud against Wiklacz, but you have to give Wiklacz the benefit of the doubt there. He was threatening well with guillotines, which really scared Mix off from getting his grappling going. Wiklacz was also more effective in the striking realm, landing his long-range weapons, good kicks, and stayed on the aggressiveness. And even when Wiklacz finally got that top position in the first round, he was able to land big shots and create that hematoma over Mix's right eye, I believe it was. But Wiklacz is a solid prospect, right? He was a guy, 29 years old, had a very good run with the KSW promotion. Obviously, their most recent bantamweight champion before, jetting over to the UFC. He's now 13-1-1 over his last 15 fights. Although 5 of those fights took place against the same opponent, Sebastian Prisbis. not even going to try to figure out how to say that guy's name, but he ended up beating him more often than not. There was a draw in there. Sebastian was able to finish him in their first matchup, but then I think first or second fight, but then since then, Wiklacz has kind of had his number. He's a very solid submission specialist, nasty guillotines, as we obviously saw him threaten Patchy Mix with. That's how he was able to beat Sebastian last time out. Decent striking game. He stays active enough from distance with his long-range weapons. I love his kicking game as well, but even in the grappling realm, he's not a greatest wrestler, but his active submission game makes him very hard to really settle on top of. Now, he normally showcases good cardio, so to see him slow down late against Patchy Mix was a little bit of a question mark, but I'm going to kind of chalk that up more so to UFC jitters. First UFC fight, high-profile fight as well, but he did enough good work through those first 2 rounds to really get the win there. But I think we might see a better and more complete version of him this time around. 1, fighting in the UFC Apex, but 2, getting those UFC jitters out, right? I believe it was a pay-per-view that he fought on last time, so a lot more platform, a lot bigger of a platform, a lot more of an audience. This time around, he's already gotten it through, arguably against a more difficult opponent last time around. Now he's going up against Moura Gafurov. Now, again, both these guys sprung upsets last time around, so they are being quite underrated by the public, and I think that's why we're seeing a very close line here as well. And it makes sense. This is a close fight. When I originally saw the odds here, I believe it was a pick'em, but now it seems like money is slowly trickling in on the Gafurov side of things, which pushes him up to the slight favorite at -120. But I think this is a fight that Wiklacz could really threaten with his aggressiveness, his ability to latch on to submissions. I think he could stick Gafurov at distance. Even if Gafurov looks for takedowns here, I think that could put him into some trouble. I think Wiklacz is a threatening enough submission specialist to catch Gafurov into some bad spots. And as we saw Gafurov make a mistake against Said Nurmagomedov, Wiklacz could absolutely do the same thing here to Gafurov. So, Gafurov might have a little bit of power advantage on the feet, but I think Wiklac's height and reach advantage will allow him to really stick Gafurov from distance. That might pull out a desperation takedown from Gafurov, and that's where Wiklacz could really get to work with his submission game, reversals, or even just threatening straight up with that guillotine and eventually getting the submission there. So I got to go with the poll here. I like that we're getting plus money on him right off the bat here. So I'm going to go Jacoby Wiklacz, and I think he gets the submission win over Moura Gafurov. All right, moving over to the next fight here. It is a women's flyweight matchup where we got Cong Wang coming in at -350, going up against Eduardo Moura, who comes in at +285. Now, Wang is slowly distancing herself from that loss she suffered at the hands of Gabriela Fernandez. And that was a fight where, she got clipped, she got hurt, she got club and subbed, essentially, right? She was looking pretty good up until that point, but she got clipped, and that does show that, as good as fighters can be, they are human at the end of the day. They can make mistakes, and fighters can clip them and obviously have success of their own. We see it, often, but that one was very surprising for a lot of people. But we saw a great performance from her in the fight after that against Bruna Brasil. She was able to stop the takedowns, land a few takedowns of her own. But then her last fight against Ariane Lipski, very solid performance. She landed 2.5 times more significant strikes than De Silva. I think it was like 140 strikes that she ended up landing there. Really picked her apart, stayed in the driver's seat the entire time. She stopped the 4 takedown attempts from Lipski. She landed a couple good leg kicks as well, which really seems to hurt the wheel of Lipski and kind of like muzzled her. But Cong was just in the driver's seat the entire time. Her striking is very high level. That's obviously the background that she had before she came into the mixed martial arts game. She had a 2015 kickboxing win over Valentina Shevchenko. So she stayed quite active, throughout her career, even as a mixed martial artist. This is going to be the longest time she's been inactive in her professional mixed martial arts career since between her first and second fight. Between her first and second fight, there was a year-long layoff. Since then, she's really gone 3-4 months between fights. Now it's been about 8 months since she got that win over Lipski. So, she's 33 years old. She's doing a good job in terms of staying active enough. And that built-in storyline that she has against Shevchenko could definitely propel her up the rankings a lot quicker, and she may have already been there should she have not fallen short against Gabriela Fernandez. Now, she's going up against Eduardo Moura, who's doing a decent enough job in terms of working back from her lone professional defeat as well. She ended up losing against Denise Gomez in a close fight. It was a split decision loss, but it showed the issues that Moura had trying to cut down to strawweight, which she failed twice in the UFC, hence why she's been forced up to 125 pounds. Her cardio was really lacking in the Gomez fight. She was more so a fighter that would look to finish fighters earlier on in her career. She was very good in terms of finishing all of her opponents before coming over to the UFC. I think there was only one fight where she... all but one opponent leading up to the Contender Series that she had finished. And now as she's fighting tougher competition, we're seeing her go to the scorecards more often, which is why her last 3 fights have hit the scorecards. She's won her last 2 fights ever since moving up to flyweight. She was able to grind out a solid first round against Hardy, got to her grappling in the second round, and then she fell short in that third round, but still did enough to win the decision. And the similar thing happened against Lauren Murphy last time around. A fighter that she had a huge youth advantage over. She was landing decent enough shots in that first round, managed to get to her grappling in that second round. That third round, she really struggled. We saw Murphy put the jets on and really land some good damage on Moura, but that's kind of been the game for Moura. Do enough through the first 2 rounds, get a finish if you can, but do enough for the first 2 rounds and do enough in that third round to just survive and see the scorecards to try to get wins there. But that's going to get harder and harder to do as she works her way up the division. Her striking still looks like a work in progress. She doesn't look the most comfortable when she's throwing hands and throwing kicks, but it seems like a means to an end to just get to that takedown and utilize her strength where she's often able to get opponents to the ground and showcase good enough top pressure and work for that top position. But in this matchup against Cong Wang, I think she's kind of screwed. I don't think she'll have a big strength advantage here, and I think she'll also struggle to get a hold of Cong, who does a great job in terms of sticking and moving, staying at distance, and punishing opponents that try to crash that pocket and initiate any type of clinch work. I think this is going to force Moura to work harder than she's used to, and I think that will leave her vulnerable, especially in the third round here, and that's where I think that Cong can really put the pressure on Moura and eventually get a TKO finish. So I don't mind the chalk on Cong. I think her takedown defense will look good enough. She is a much superior striker to Moura, and I think she'll eventually be able to put together a barrage of shots in that third round and get the finish here over the Brazilian. So give me Cong Wang by round 3. TKO. All right, moving over to a men's bantamweight clash here. It goes down between Said Nurmagomedov, who comes in at -105, going up against the slumping Javid Basharat, who comes in at -115. Now, starting off on the Nurmagomedov side of things, he's slumping a little bit too. 1-3 in his last 4 fights, most recently coming off of a decision loss against Bryce Mitchell. Prior to that, lost to the man main eventing this card in Vinicius Oliveira, but he was able to get that quick submission win over Gafurov to have that 1 win in this 4-fight stretch that he's currently on. He's a very dangerous fighter early, right? Very good guillotine, just ask Gafurov and Said Kakhramonov. Decent striker early in terms of the power in which he throws. He has a nasty spinning back kick to the body he's able to implement. But if he can't fight at his own pace, and if he's fighting somebody that's going to push the pace against him or grapple heavy against him, he's going to struggle. That's where we see his cardio issues come into play, just as they did against Martinez, just as they did against Oliveira and Mitchell as well. He's very threatening in short spurts. If he can't get off on much success early and find that finish, he's often going to find himself at the whim of his opponent. And that's kind of been his issue throughout his career. If he can't get that early finish, things go sour, right? We've seen it time and time again where it's kind of bailed him out of some bad spots. But, even the Said Kakhramonov fight, that's the fight where I felt like if Kakhramonov defended that submission, he would have gone on to continue to win that fight. So Nurmagomedov is more of a finish or bust kind of fighter, and he is dangerous, don't get me wrong. But I think we're starting to see at this stage in his career, things are starting to slow down for him a little bit, and it's getting harder for him to, get those chokes, harder for him to land those big shots. And again, he often gets pushed back. He's easy to take down once he starts sucking wind, and that's kind of been his issue at this stage of his career. Now, he's going up against Javid Basharat, who unfortunately has not gotten his hand raised since 2023, which is crazy considering how hyped, how loved amongst bettors he was. He was always finding himself as a big favorite, but he's been falling short in recent fights. The Amin Zahabi fight started off strong, but Zahabi game planned well for the second and third rounds and just managed to outstrike Basharat that night and pull off the big upset. Then last time around, against Ricky Simone, Basharat was doing decent, shucking off takedowns, working back to his feet, landing his distance striking, but Simone was getting closer and closer with that bomb, and he eventually landed it and put Basharat out cold. That was one of the more devastating knockouts that we saw, but it's also encouraging if you like Basharat in the spot that he's been sitting out for as long as he has. I believe that was I want to say 6 months ago. I want to get the exact time frame here of when that was. Yeah, a full year off now. So that's more than enough time for him to be sitting on the sidelines, recovering from that, but also trying to work on his confidence, right? It's got to be very detrimental to a fighter to have 2 straight losses and coming off a devastating knockout the way that he did, especially after having such a clean run up until that point against Zahabi. He's a very educated striker from distance. Maybe he has to tighten up the defense a little bit more, especially after that last loss. Good range management, good combinations, good timing, solid kicks, and he has a reliable grappling game if that's something that he wants to rely on, depending on the stylistic clash that he has ahead of him. The question mark becomes, how affected will he be by that last knockout? And that's obviously going to be tested here against Said Nurmagomedov, who's going to be looking to take off his head right off the bat. Now, I believe in Basharat's submission defense enough that I don't think he'll get caught in a sub by Nurmagomedov, but I think the threat of the finish, the early finish here from Nurmagomedov, could make it a little bit shaky for Basharat. We've seen a ton of love come in on Nurmagomedov over the last, 24, 48 hours. When I originally studied this matchup, Basharat was at minus 160. Now he's down to minus 115. Seems like a lot of people believe that Nurmagomedov can pressure him early and get the finish. But I think we're going to see a cautious Basharat, which would help him really counter the aggressiveness of Nurmagomedov. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see Basharat lean on his grappling here to try to succumb or at least contain Nurmagomedov and stay away from that dangerous finishing power that he has. So originally, I was a little bit skeptical of taking Basharat at minus 160, but at minus 115, I think this is a good enough entry to try to take advantage of a good enough line on a very talented fighter. Skill for skill, I think Basharat is a better fighter here. The difference is obviously questioning what his mentality is going to be coming into this fight, and if that makes him a little bit too gun-shy, and obviously the finishing nature of Nurmagomedov, which makes this a closer fight, and which is why I understand why people are taking the leap on Nurmagomedov here, even with the slump that he's on. I'm still going to go Basharat. I think we get a clean performance from him here. I think he mixes the martial arts well enough to put together a good enough body of work, and I think that leads to him eventually winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, that brings us to our next matchup here in the women's strawweight division, as we have Bruna Brasil coming in at plus 150, going up against Ketlin Souza, who comes in at minus 175. Now, starting off on the Brasil side of things, she's coming off of a dominant decision victory over Shi Ming, who was getting a big push from the UFC. Now, that fight was one of those weird circumstances where they put it on a road to UFC card and made it the headlining bout of that fight night. It seemed like, again, the UFC was trying to push the Chinese fighter, especially after that nasty and devastating head kick knockout that she had that earned her UFC contract. Unfortunately, we saw what kind of issues she'll run into against UFC level competition. Now, Brasil is also a fringe UFC fighter, right? There's times where she's just a little bit too gun shy and allows opponents to get ahead of her. Sometimes she makes some fight IQ mistakes and allows opponents to, get good takedowns or good top control. She doesn't stay active enough off her back to try to pull submissions off or work back to her feet. But when she's locked in, right? The Shauna Bannon fight, the Molly McCann fight, the Shi Ming fight, when she's locked in, she's very hard to deal with because her takedown defense normally looks good. Then from there, her striking starts to flow effortlessly, and she's able to utilize her reach, which is usually on the higher end for a lot of these opponents at 65 inches in the strawweight division, and that allows her to really just stick opponents from distance, good combinations, good leg kicks. I think she's talented, right? I think she has good potential. But similar to Denzel Freeman, but Freeman obviously completely shit the bed against Josh Hockett a couple of weeks back. Brasil is skilled. It's just about locking in. It's just about pulling the trigger a little bit more. It's not allowing opponents to dictate the pace and being okay with them dictating the pace. And that's kind of been my holdup with Brasil. I feel like every fight outside of her Shei Ming fight, I've predicted incorrectly. I picked against her in certain spots and lost. I've picked her in certain spots, and she's won. So that's kind of been my holdup with the Bruna Brasil fight, no matter who she ends up going up against. Now, she's going up against former Invicta champion Ketlin Souza, who's looking to buck a 2-fight losing streak. She's lost both fights by split decision against Angela Hill, and then most recently against Piera Rodriguez. Now, I thought the Rodriguez fight was a little bit more convincing for Rodriguez, so I don't think that should have been a split to begin with. I think Rodriguez mixed in takedowns at opportune moments, had some good control time, and it really muzzled Souza's offense for the most part. I'm really struggling to get a finger on Souza's game, right? She seems mediocre all around. Even though she was an Invicta champion, the fighter that she beat was pretty mediocre to abysmal level of talent. And she didn't even get to defend the title because she got signed to the UFC almost immediately. To me, she looks like she plods forward, throws big shots. That's how she was able to catch Horiguchi and then eventually find that submission at the Noche UFC event at the Sphere. She has a decent submission game. She can be taken down and grappled. So she's a bit of a wild card, at least in my mind. I'm sure other people can get a better grasp on what she brings to the table compared to what I can. But I, really question whether she is a fighter that deserves to be ranked and a fighter that can have any type of success in the UFC. Obviously, she's gotten wins over Marc McMahon and Yasmin Horiguchi. But again, she's 2-3 in the promotion now. So here against Bruna Brasil, both these women, wild cards to me. I get why Souza is a favorite here. When Brasil fights anybody of legitimate nature, she ends up kind of just fighting at their pace and allowing fights to slip through her fingers. And I feel like that's what could end up happening here against Souza. I think Brasil can move well from distance, maybe land some good jabs and good kicks, but I think Souza will do a good enough job in terms of corralling her against the cage and either mixing it up in the clinch, landing some bombs of her own once she gets Brasil behind the warning track, and again, landing some takedowns, getting some good top control, and really just stifling that pedestrian approach that Brasil approaches some of her fights with. So I'm going to go I'm going to go Souza here. Very low confidence. I think she grinds this fight out, and I think she wins it on the scorecards. Moving over to the next matchup now. We got a welterweight clash here between veteran Alex Morono, who comes in at plus 420, going up against Daniil Donchenko, who comes in at minus 550. Now, kicking things off on the Moreno side of things, the guy's slumping. 1-4 in his last 5. Got absolutely handled by Carlos Leal last time around. Just banged on up against the cage. Now, we saw Morono try to dig deep into the style that used to make him more successful earlier on in the UFC. Dragging guys into wars, throwing with big power, hurting them, clubbing some of them, doing that type of stuff. But it's clear that his chin is just not holding up the way that it used to. He does not eat damage the way that he used to, and that's often falling him into the cage and coming through with some of the losses that he's had. He has a 13-9 UFC record overall, but 5 of those 9 losses have come in his last 7 fights. So he's 2-5 over his last 7 fights. Not a good look. His only win came against Court McGee, who we also know is an aging and slowing veteran as well. But Morono is a guy that often thrives in chaos. He just can't seem to do that anymore. He's a BJJ black belt, but we don't often see him relying on that, but rather looking to utilize a hoppity striking game where he throws a deceiving power, but that's lack of speed, the lack of athleticism is really hindering him at this stage of his career. He's done good work as a commentator over there for Fury FC for certain fights, but it seems like he's at the decline of his career, and you can just see it in his last 5 fights alone. The Daniel Rodriguez fight, he was looking good for about 6-7 minutes. Then his cardio hit a bit of a wall, and that's where Rodriguez started to take over and take advantage of the slowing Morono. Morono used to have a decent enough gas tank, but it seems like he hits a wall halfway through that second round, and especially as he starts eating big shots from heavy hitters, things start to go downhill for him pretty quickly. Now he's going up against a man 11 years his younger, or I guess Donchenko is fighting a guy that's 11 years his elder, I should say. Donchenko absolutely streaking as of late. This guy won a decent title for Niza FC, facing some decent competition, got onto the Ultimate Fighter, ran through most of those guys, putting on very entertaining matchups, and then he had his finale matchup against Rodrigo Cezinado. and made it known from jump what he's going to bring to the table after getting signed to the UFC. Within the first 30 seconds, he landed a beautiful step-in elbow against Cezinado and, opened up a nasty cut that started leaking immediately, and Donchenko just stayed on Cezinado the entire time. Cezinado tried getting to his grappling game, which made him so successful on The Ultimate Fighter, but Donchenko shucked off those takedowns, got back to his pace and pressure, opened up even more cuts on Cezinado, and eventually got the finish near the ending of that first round. Donchenko loves his Muay Thai. He loves his knees, he loves his elbows, and he utilizes his elbows almost as frequently as he utilizes his jabs. He loves to meet his opponent in the pocket with an elbow, and that often causes cuts almost immediately. There's so many fights you can go back and watch. Check out the MMA Fight Archive. You can get all the direct links to Donchenko's past fights, and you can see how often he relies on those elbows and how many nasty cuts he's left in his, on his path of destruction en route to the UFC. He's trained at Tiger Muay Thai a bunch. He mixes things up down at Syndicate in Vegas whenever he wants to take advantage of the UFC PI. But this kid is very fun to watch, very aggressive, very nasty, and unfortunately a very bad matchup for Alex Morono. I get it. Morono has a tough strength of schedule, 22 UFC fights, but it's clear that things are just falling off for him. And I think this is a horrible stylistic matchup going up against a guy that has the type of aggressiveness, viciousness, ferocity in which Donchenko fights with. And I think that will lead to Donchenko just bloodying and battering Morono in this first round. And I think that leads to Donchenko getting that first round finish. So I don't mind the chalk on him. I know I'm usually very skeptical about fighters coming into the UFC as heavy favorites against veterans, but it's a case-by-case type of thing for me in terms of predictions, and I feel in this matchup specifically, it is a horrible one for Alex Morono. So once again, give me Danil Donchenko round 1 knockout. Moving over to this next matchup, it takes place in the light heavyweight division between Dustin Jacoby, who comes in at minus 195, going up against Julius Walker, who comes in at plus 160. Now, Jacoby is stepping in on somewhat short notice for Uran Saltibaldiev, who is forced to pull out of this matchup, and Jacoby looking to build upon a 2-fight winning streak that he currently has. His last 2 fights have been by knockout. The first of those coming against Vitor Petrino, which was a competitive fight going into that third round. I thought it was 1-1 either way, and then Jacoby unleashed a big combination to knock Petrino out and get his hand raised. That ultimately halted a 2-fight losing streak for Jacoby, who lost to Alonzo Menefield, who, in a fight where Jacoby, I'll talk about this a little bit more as we get deeper into Jacoby, where, some of the volume of Jacoby was nullified by the power and knockdowns of Menefield, and then Reyes was able to land a big shot on Jacoby and put him away as well. And then last time out for Jacoby, he was able to get the knockout victory over Bruno Lopez. It was clear he had a decided striking advantage there. He was able to shuck off a few of the takedowns from Lopez and then just batter him on the feet and eventually find that big shot to put Lopez away. It was one of the more violent finishes we saw with the barrage of shots he landed against Lopez, who eventually succumbed to the last one. Jacoby is a talented and one of the more better technical strikers in the light heavyweight division. His issue in the past has been he doesn't throw with enough power at times, and that allows opponents to land with big power in return and then either knock him out, as Dominic Reyes did, or knock him down in multiple rounds and steal those rounds back, just as we saw Alonzo Menefield do, and just as we saw Azamat Mirzakhanov do. Though, he's outstriking those guys, landing more effective damage, but then they're able to drop him and then steal the round back. And that's, just very unfortunate for a guy in Jacoby, who I think is very talented and could have found himself in title contention until he started going on that bit of a slump and his durability started to bite him in the ass. His takedown defense, high level. He doesn't often find himself in bad spots. He's always working back to his feet and then getting back to his output heavy game, which is a big spot that's quite reliable in certain fights. The qualm that I have with him going into this matchup, which is a very favorable fight for him, right? Minus 190 favorite for a good reason. Why in the world did he go and corner Cody Brundage in Australia this past weekend? A week before he's fighting himself in Vegas. You're talking about 20 plus hours of travel, acclimating from one side of the world back to the other, having to cut weight as well. I don't think he cuts a whole lot of weight to make 205 pounds, but still, there's got to be some sort of negative impact in his ability to perform to his best of his abilities this weekend. So that's one thing that's kind of just weighing in the back of my head as I'm breaking this fight down. Now, let's move over to the Julius Walker side of things, who was able to get his first UFC win last time around against Rafael Sygula. That allowed him to bounce back from his loss that he suffered at the hands of Alonzo Menefield in a fight that was quite close. That was a UFC debut for Walker against a very experienced guy in Alonzo Menefield, who, throws with a lot of heat. We obviously saw that on display as Walker ate big shots from him and just, somehow stayed in the fight. It started to get sloppy as we got into the deeper water, but Walker, credit to him for being able to stick that one out. Against Sygula, I really thought Walker, if he just believed in his hands, could have done enough to get Sygula out of there quickly. Sygula is a guy that is getting finished quickly. I believe he's 0-4 in his UFC fights. He's been finished in less than a minute in 2 of his UFC performances, and then 3 of those 4 performances, he got finished in less than 2.5 rounds. The only guy he got into the second round with, or even went to a decision with, was Julius Walker. Walker believed his BJJ and grappling would be enough to submit and finish Sygula, but we saw that fight go into deep water and go to the scorecards. That's what Walker normally fights with. He likes to utilize his grappling, try to assert his dominance from top position, either with ground and pound, control, or threatening with submissions as well. He's athletic, he's big, he's long, he's lanky, but he questions himself in the striking game, which is why he's often finding himself wrestling and trying to get opponents to the ground. He could have some decent potential. He's 26 years old, and athleticism takes you a long way at this level, especially at this weight class. But I feel like the Menefield fight showed a little bit of the holes in his game. And again, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt there, considering he only had, 6 fights going into that fight against Menefield, where there was a huge experience advantage for Menefield. So I'll give him a break there, but he needs to work on the rest of his game if he really wants to have success at this level. Now, here against Dustin Jacoby, tough fight for Walker. Jacoby, far superior striker. Can Walker clip him and probably get him out of there? It's possible. It's mixed martial arts, right? Anything can happen, but I'd be surprised if he does. Unless he's been solely working on his striking here and realizing that the chin of Jacoby can be cracked, maybe the speed and power of Walker could help him land that big shot. But I'd be surprised if that happens. I think Jacoby is the rightful favorite here. 2-1 sounds right. Jacoby should be able to pick Walker apart. I think it's just a matter of time before Walker looks to shoot a takedown and try to get this fight to the ground. But I think he's going to come up short. I think Jacoby has too good of a defensive grappling game. I think he'll force Walker to strike with him. And I think it's just a matter of time before Jacoby finds a big shot. And again, it looks like he's believing in his power in his recent fights. And I think he could land that big power to put Walker away here. So I'm going to go Jacoby. I would have more confidence in him if he didn't do an asinine thing by cornering Brundage in Australia this weekend. If he fought, if that fight was in New York or something like that, okay, cool. But it is a long flight to get to freaking Australia and then have to come back as well a week before your fight. Horrible, horrible decision-making there for Jacoby. I still think he wins. I still think he has a big enough advantage to make this look good, but I would not have as much confidence as I would have if he didn't make that trip. So give me Jacoby, and Jacoby by knockout. All right, moving over to a bantamweight clash now. We got Gene Matsumoto coming in at plus 235, going up against Farid Basharat, who comes in at minus 275. Now, Gene Matsumoto is one of my favorite prospects in the bantamweight division. This kid is nasty, very aggressive with his Muay Thai, loves to exchange in the pocket. His durability has held up well for him thus far, and his only loss came at the hands of Rob Font in a very short notice fight. If you guys remember, Matsumoto was scheduled to take on a different opponent. I can't recall who, but he moved his training camp up a week or two just so he could take the short notice spot against Font. And I really think that fight came down to that first round. That first round, we saw Font almost fake a glove touch, but immediately go into a 1-2, and that rocked Matsumoto off the bat. And we saw Font get some decent control time until Matsumoto was able to work back to his feet and then get back to his own game. I thought Matsumoto won rounds 1 and 2, and that third round, Font was able to start pushing away. or pulling away. But I think if Matsumoto did not get clipped early there, that could have been a very tough spot for Font at the beginning of the fight. But he did manage to bounce back in his next matchup against Miles Johns. It was a very close fight that could have gone either way. He did a good enough job in terms of landing his damage. He was able to fend off the takedowns from Johns again, and that was very intriguing. Now, what I found weird about that fight is the scorecards for the Johns fight. The two judges that scored the fight for Matsumoto, they scored rounds 2 and 3 for him. The other judge scored it completely the opposite. That other judge gave Matsumoto round 1 and Johns round 2 and 3. So it was a close fight the entire way. I thought Matsumoto landed some good damage, fended the takedowns, like I said, very well. And that's kind of the aspect of his game that he's improving upon, is being a little bit more defensively responsible with his grappling. He's often showed some good takedowns of his own. He's very aggressive with that guillotine in case anybody starts to shoot bad takedowns, as we saw him do against Dan Argueta. So there are some issues in his game. He just needs to be a little bit more well-rounded and try to be a little bit more responsible, especially when he's throwing as often as he does inside the pocket. He throws good combinations, good Muay Thai, good knees, good elbows as well. Still very young, 26 years old. He's had some pretty good strength of schedule as well, especially being only 26 years old. But he's a guy that I have my eye on kind of moving forward here. Now he's going up against Farid Basharat, who's still an unblemished 14-0, coming off of a pretty convincing win against Chris Gutierrez last time. The issue it seems that Basharat is having is, being able to be effective over 15 minutes. Seems like that third round is a little bit of a challenge for him at times, but he's a guy that used to be a good striker. He used to have good combinations, good leg kicks, be very intelligent with his in and out movement. But as of late, since coming to the UFC, a little bit more keen with that grappling game. And he's very good from the top position in terms of controlling opponents. He's threatened with submissions, but he's much more position over submission. His entries into his takedowns are very impressive, especially with his ability to mask those takedowns by throwing some traffic out there with his combinations, with his striking. Very impressive in that realm. Still 28 years old, so still has a lot of room to grow. Him and his brother, Javid, came into the UFC roughly around the same time, and I was one of those guys that thought Javid was much better than Farid, but as we're seeing in recent fights, Farid seems to be a little bit cleaner, although you can say that Javid's been fighting a little bit tougher of competition. But this is definitely a tough class that he has here against Jin Matsumoto. I was originally on the fence before I got into the tape here when this fight was originally scheduled, but after running the tape, it seems like Basharat should get the job done. Should it be as wide as minus 275 for Basharat? Probably not. Matsumoto could definitely make this competitive with his striking advantage, with how aggressive he is, but I believe that aggressiveness could potentially work against him here. Basharat could snipe him from distance a bit, right? He could have some success with his 3-inch reach advantage. He'll also have a 2-inch height advantage as well. Not anything major, but I think that will help him kind of see Matsumoto crashing the pocket. And from there, I think we'll see Basharat clip him, land some good counter striking of his own, but then eventually mix in those takedowns. And I think those moments of control time, landing some damage of his own. Basharat's pretty good in terms of landing effective damage from top control, even if he's not advancing to more dominant positions. But I think he can mix in the grappling, mix in the takedowns, and really cause some issues here for Matsumoto. I would like a better line on Basharat. I don't think we're going to get that here. Matsumoto could absolutely make this competitive, but I'm not so keen on him to the point of going in on that plus 235. So official prediction here will be Basharat. Just a better overall game. His grappling will be the difference maker, and I think that leads to Basharat winning this fight on the scorecards. All right. Moving over to the next matchup here, which takes place in the middleweight division. We got Michal Oleksiejczuk coming in at minus 350, going up against marc-andre Barriault, who comes in at plus 285. Now, starting off on the Michal Oleksiejczuk side of things, he's on a 2-fight winning streak now, knocking out Cedricus Dumas and Gerald Meerschaert both in the first round. That halted a 3-fight losing streak for Oleksiejczuk. And, those losses coming to Michel Pereira, Kevin Holland, where he had a big brain fart there after dropping Holland, going into the guard, and then getting submitted. And then just didn't have the power to match Nurmagomedov and ended up losing a decision that night. After that, he joined up with the Fighting Nerds and really honed in on being a little bit more tactical and methodical with his approach rather than just trying to headhunt and try to knock these guys out. That obviously played well into those Dumas and Meerschaert fights, which kept those guys that would probably going to look to grapple against Oleksiejczuk, and then kept Oleksiejczuk at distance, landed his big shots, and eventually found those finishes. It seems like he's kind of parted ways from the Fighting Nerds now. It seems him and his brother Cezary, another UFC fighter, have set up shop in Poland and started their own gym. Obviously, very smart thing to do when you got brothers who are fighting at a high level, coming through with big wins as well. It's easy to get a big following, especially in a smaller country like Poland, and it seems like that's what the Oleksiejczuk brothers are trying to do. I've always been a fan of Oleksiejczuk because of his entertaining style. He loves to utilize body work. He loves to just set up those big shots to the head. His defensive grappling is still obviously a work in progress, but improving his footwork and his distance management has helped him become a little bit better of a defensive grappler because opponents are finding it harder to get in on the hips of Oleksiejczuk because of the angles that he's cutting, the power in which he's throwing in return, and that obviously helps him be a little bit more dominant with his striking style. I think a lot of people are high on Oleksiejczuk because of those two big knockouts. But again, when you think about Dumas and Meerschaert, not great strikers, questionable durability to begin with, those should have been winnable fights for Oleksiejczuk. He's going up against a slumping Marc-Andre Barriault, who is now 1-4 in his last 5 fights. He's been finished in 2 of those spots, one by Joe Pyfer, who obviously big power edge there. He was able to land on Barriault and put him out. The surprising one was Dustin Stoltzfus, who was able to land that big shot on Barriault and put him away. But luckily, Barriault was able to save himself and get a nasty finish over Bruno Silva, just landing elbow after elbow to get that TKO finish in his hometown of Montreal. Then he took on Nurmagomedov, where we saw him eat some big shots from Magomedov, but still continue to chug forward. The issue is he just struggled with the Muay Thai of Magomedov, where Barriault, I was going to say Bagomedov, where Barriault often does his best work is in the clinch. He really roughs and riles dudes up in the clinch, pushes them against the cage, drives his forehead into their chin and their upper chest, using it as a post, and then from there just does some good body work, mixes in his elbows over top, really wears guys down there and often pulls away in deep water. His cardio is obviously very high level as well for a middleweight, and that's often where we see him do his best work in deep water. But his durability has just been such a big red flag in recent fights that it kind of makes him a little bit more of a liability no matter who he's going up against. I know a lot of people that probably lost a lot of money trying to bet on Magomedov by knockout, and that just brings the wild card nature of mixed martial arts into question. Magomedov, on paper, should have knocked out a guy like Barriault, right? If Barriault is getting finished by Dustin Stoltzfus of all people, you would expect Magomedov to have the amount of power, similar to Stoltzfus, even more, to try to finish Barriault. But, that's why you have to take odds into consideration for a lot of matchups. Specifically for this one here against Oleksiejczuk. Conventional wisdom will make you believe that Oleksiejczuk probably walks Barriault down and finishes him with big shots. But if Barriault's chin holds up and Barriault is able to get into the style that has made him effective in the past, roughing Oleksiejczuk up in the clinch, he could have some success in this fight and really wear Oleksiejczuk down. Whether that converts to him landing takedowns or even just staying in the clinch and landing his big shots there, it could work out pretty well for him. The issue that Barriault had in the Magomedov fight with trying to have success in the clinch, which is where he's most successful, is the Muay Thai background of Magomedov. Magomedov thrives in the Muay Thai clinch, right? You want to put him in the clinch? Great. He's going to hit you with knees. He's going to hit you with elbows. He's going to deter you from trying to hold on to him. And that's what we saw in the Barriault fight. But Oleksiejczuk is not a Muay Thai specialist. Oleksiejczuk is more of a boxer, if anything, right? Again, heavy-footed, plods forward, cuts off the cage well. A little bit better, like I said, with his distance management and footwork now after working with the Fighting Nerds. But there's still the question mark of how he deals with the guy that's going to constantly put him in the clinch and try to wear him down that way. So if Barriault's chin holds up, he can have success. And I know what you're thinking. The way that I'm talking here makes you believe that I'm going to side with Barriault. Not entirely. I think Oleksiejczuk eventually finds the chin and puts Barriault away. Right, we saw Oleksiejczuk minus 280 just a few days ago, all the way up at minus 350. Seems like that's what everybody's going to be leaning on here. But if Barriault's chin holds up like it did against Nurmagomedov, I think he has more tools to make this a little bit more difficult for Oleksiejczuk to get off on his game. And I think Barriault could have a bit of a strength advantage here, too, maybe even a cardio advantage. So the prediction is going to be Oleksiejczuk by knockout. I think he eventually lands that big shot and puts Barriault away. But in terms of odds, minus 350 is just far too wide to be confident enough on that type of outcome. I think plus 285 on Barriault is worth a little bit of a sprinkle here. He could make it tough. He could make it grindy. He could make it grueling. And I think that's where Oleksiejczuk might find himself into some trouble. If Oleksiejczuk has developed a Muay Thai game to be comfortable in the clinch and getting pushed up against the cage, all credit to him. But from everything I've seen thus far, that's where Barriault can make him uncomfortable and really wear Oleksiejczuk down, maybe even wear on the power of Oleksiejczuk, so it's harder for Oleksiejczuk to land those power shots in the second and third rounds and be a little bit more favorable for Barriault. So if you want to maybe take a live betting approach here, maybe looking into Barriault in rounds 2 and 3 might not be a bad spot. But I think that power from Oleksiejczuk could reign supreme early and lead to that early knockout. But please consider Barriault as a live underdog. All right, next up in the heavyweight division, we got Jailton Almeida coming in at minus 150, going up against Rizvan Kuniev, who comes in at plus 130. Now, starting off on the Jailton Almeida side of things, I was quite confident in him last time around when he took on Alexander Volkov. I thought he'd get the takedowns with ease. I thought he would smash Volkov. I thought he would have been able to even get a finish. But he had his moments, couldn't get off on enough effective damage. Volkov worked back to his feet, even reversed a couple positions, and got off on much more significant damage, and that led to Almeida losing that fight on the scorecards. The famous clip that came out prior to that fight was when DC was talking to Tom Aspinall. That was the same card where Aspinall went up against Cyril Gane, and DC was hyping Tom Aspinall up in a clip that probably shouldn't have been released to the public through Tom Aspinall's YouTube page. And we saw DC saying, "Hey, Almeida has no striking. That guy can't fight." And we saw it on display against Volkov, right? If Almeida can't get the takedowns, he's kind of lost on the feet. He's vulnerable on the feet. Then he starts to get desperate. Then his gas tank starts coming into question. And that's where he starts to struggle. So yeah, he's looked dominant in certain matchups. Alexander Romanov, Sergey Spivak, able to finish those guys with relative ease and pretty quickly. But he struggled to get Curtis Blaydes down. You know, he probably won that first round. I don't recall who won it on the judges' scorecards. But, you know, pushing Blaydes up against the cage, constantly trying to work for the takedown, but never being able to settle to that top position. And that got him into trouble in the second round. We saw Blaydes finish him with those Travis Brown-style elbows and those hammer fists while defending takedowns. So Almeida is kind of handcuffed to that style of just being this dominant grappler, which, again, has worked out and made him look dominant in certain fights, but it's going to work against him when he's facing other tough grapplers, guys that aren't at as much of a athleticism disadvantage. You know, Sergey Spivak, Romanov, not as athletic as Almeida, and that's why they found themselves in those bad positions and getting finished. So those are the questions you have to have whenever you look into an Almeida fight. Now he's going up against Rizvan Kuniev, who came up short against Curtis Blaydes in a very close split decision loss back in his UFC debut. It was a great learning experience, even in a loss. But he did good work in terms of landing more effective damage with his striking, showcasing a much better boxing game than I was originally anticipating, and then obviously being very competitive in the wrestling realm, which is where we often know Blaydes is most effective. But we saw Kuniev do good work on the Contender Series to get the finish over a BJJ black belt. He even has a win over former PFL Heavyweight World Tournament champion Renan Ferreira. Kuniev is a UFC level talent, a guy that could probably even be in the top 10 of the division. And there is an argument that he even won that Curtis Blaydes fight. He made an IG post after that matchup saying that, hey, I know both of us came into this matchup with injuries, so I'd love to see what Kuniev looks like when he has his full facilities about him. right? He's a better striker than people give him credit for. Obviously, we know he has a good enough wrestling game to really implement his damage from that top position if he needs to. And his durability is quite high level as well. I know he doesn't look the most in shape in that in the graphic that I have up on the screen right now. That was taken, I believe, before his Contender Series matchup. And what they normally do with a lot of these Contender Series fighters, they fly them in, weeks before the Contender Series even takes place, and they take all these promotional pictures for these fighters, so they often look out of shape. Not saying he's a guy that's often in great shape, but he is a guy. Obviously, in this picture, it does not depict him what he normally looks like when he's fighting. But in this fight against Jailton Almeida, you're seeing love come in on the Kuniev side of things. Almeida was minus 200 when I researched this fight, and now at the time of this recording, Almeida's down to minus 150. So clear love coming in for the Russian, and I think for good reason. I think he can stop the takedowns of Almeida. And even if he does get taken down, I think he can work quickly back to his feet before finding himself in a compromising position where Almeida can work for a finish. I think that will slow Almeida down. I think that will lead to Kuniev starting to take over in the second, maybe third round, and I think that would lead to Kuniev eventually finding that finish. I think he starts outboxing Almeida. I think he starts incorporating his own takedown, because we know once Almeida is gassed, he doesn't really have much to offer off of his back, and we know Kuniev can be very effective from that top position. So I'm going to go Kuniev here. I think he gets that round 2, round 3 TKO, and it would not surprise me at all if this matchup ends up being closer to a pick'em by fight time, especially with the trend of this fight. So I'm going to go Kuniev and Kuniev by TKO in round 2 or round 3. All right, that brings us to our flyweight co-main event now, where we got Amir Albazi coming in at plus 285, going up against Kyoji Horiguchi, who is minus 350. Now, starting off on the Albazi side of things, he is coming off of a main event loss against Brandon Moreno from 2024, which means that Albazi has been sitting on the sidelines for quite a while now. He's had to deal with a lot of injuries, which often keeps him inactive. He was scheduled for a fight in 2025 against Tatsuro Taira. That was meant to be a fight night main event, but he was forced to pull out of it. But now he makes his return in a high-profile matchup against a former UFC title challenger. Albazi was streaking, obviously, right? He's had a lot of good wins on his record, was undefeated in the UFC leading into that Moreno matchup. He's had some close fights. The Zumagula fight could have gone either way. The Kai Kara France fight, a lot of people are thinking that he should have lost that main event slot. But he ends up getting the split decision. I think it was a split decision win. But against Moreno, we saw what his ceiling is. If he can get to his wrestling and accrue enough top position, he's going to get outboxed by these superior strikers, and that's exactly what happened in the Moreno fight. I think outside of one judge that gave one round for him, he pretty much got swept on all scorecards that night. He has a developing striking game, so he's definitely getting better with his hands, but the crux of his game is often with the wrestling and that top pressure. Once he's able to establish that top pressure, he's able to, grind opponents out, get to finishing positions. He has some decent striking when he can get to it, but a lot of his success comes from that wrestling. His gas tank is also not that bad either. But, the inactivity, the injuries, it all makes you think whether he has what it takes to really establish himself back into title contention. And now, going up against a guy in Kyoji Horiguchi who could not have had a better return than what he had against Tagir Ulanbekov when he was able to get the third round submission victory that night. I believe it was the third round. Maybe second round. Yeah, second round. Horiguchi showed great takedown defense against Ulanbekov, got off on his own takedowns and pummeled Ulanbekov. Great kicking game as well that really muzzled Ulanbekov's style, and we saw Horiguchi just style on him, and it was such a dominant performance. Really outfought that big plus money line that he had coming into that fight. I was on the Ulanbekov side. I don't think I played it, but I did predict Ulanbekov because I think that Ulanbekov would have been able to get the takedowns and get good control time. But it's very obvious that Horiguchi has worked on his defensive grappling game, especially after coming up short against Patchy Mix 4 years ago. A lot of that probably also had to do with the fact that he was being forced to fight at 135, now being able to fight at 125, not as much of a strength disadvantage, which obviously plays into the grappling game in certain fights. But in this matchup here, against Albazi, I think we'll see Horiguchi's brilliance, and I think that's why he's up at minus 350 again. I think he'll stop the takedowns of Albazi. I think he'll be a much faster striker. I think the kicking game is going to cause Albazi a lot of trouble, and I think that will eventually lead to a Horiguchi knockout win. Horiguchi is just far superior in every aspect of the game here. Maybe takedown for takedown, maybe Albazi might have a smidgen of an advantage, but it's not so much to the point that I think he's going to be a live dog here. He's going to be forced to strike with Horiguchi, and then I think he's just going to be behind it the entire time. Horiguchi has had some suspect chin issues at times, right? Sergio Pettis landed that spinning back elbow, I think it was, or spinning back fist that Horiguchi did not see coming at all. And then, that was the last time that we saw Horiguchi get cracked and get finished. But I think that's more of an anomaly. I think he's usually pretty safe in the striking realm, and I just don't see the type of threat that Albazi brings with his striking that would cause Horiguchi problems here. So once again, I'm going to go Horiguchi by knockout. Very interested to see what those odds are when those drop for that prop, but I think Horiguchi makes this look easy, and I think minus 350 ends up looking like a steal of a line. All right. That brings us to our bantamweight main event for UFC Vegas 113, and it goes down between Mario Bautista, who comes in at minus 190. He takes on Vinicius Oliveira, who comes in at plus 165. Now, starting off on the Mario Bautista side of things, he had an 8-fight winning streak going into his matchup against Umar Nurmagomedov, but it was his 6-fight winning streak that got him that high-profile matchup against Jose Aldo, and really turned the crowd against Bautista. That 6-fight winning streak he had going up against Aldo, had 3 finishes as well, showcased how vicious and violent he could really be, nasty striking, underrated submission game. His game was really coming together. It seemed like the guys over there at the MMA lab really honed in on Bautista and got him to achieve his potential. But against Aldo, he threatened with a bunch of takedowns, really corralled Aldo up against the cage and got a bunch of control time there. And it was just a really slow and, we'll say it, a boring fight. And that turned the crowd against him, but Bautista still managed to get his hand raised that night. Then he was put up against Patchy Mix, who was making his UFC debut, and we saw Bautista shut down Mix's game and outstrike him and get off on good damage there. That ultimately landed him up against Umar Nurmagomedov, which would probably have given Bautista a title shot had he gotten past Nurmagomedov, but we know how good Nurmagomedov is. He also may not be the most exciting fighter, but he was just better all around. Landed good strikes, landed good takedowns, good chain wrestling. Bautista did manage to land a big, heavy knee, I believe, in the second round of that fight, but Nurmagomedov got right back into the game and got back off on his damage. Bautista is an educated, solid fighter, but I think that loss against Nurmagomedov kind of took a bit of, not steam, but maybe a little bit of the pressure off of Bautista. He has that winning streak snap now, but he's now in a position where he can remind fans that he's still a very violent and fun and entertaining fighter. He doesn't have to try to work towards a title shot as much anymore. I'm sure that's still a part of his plans, but I think he can be a little bit freer now that he doesn't have this crazy winning streak going into these fights. Violent striker, like I said, very educated, good fight IQ, good game planning, great training camp as well. He's definitely still one of the top bantamweights in the division. Now he's going up against a streaking Vinicius Oliveira, who's absolutely been killing it as of late. He has a 4-fight winning streak in the UFC ever since debuting after winning on the Contender Series. He had a crazy back and forth battle against Bernardo Sopai before he was able to get that 3rd round finish. Then he was able to style on Ricky Simón after shucking off all those takedowns. He was able to walk through Said Nurmagomedov, and then last time around had great success against Kyler Phillips. It's really his aggressive and violent, reckless style that makes him so dangerous. Has a ton of good experience. He was the former UAE Warriors champion before he ran into a well-rounded fighter like Ali Taleb. But Oliveira, he shows almost no respect to his opponents. He just walks them down, throws big shots, throws some flashy strikes. If he sees an opening to get the fight into the grappling realm, he'll take it. But often he's the one utilizing his grappling defensively to try to force opponents to strike with him. His gas tank is a bit of a question mark, but, especially with how his body language looks later on in fights and how low he keeps his hands. But just the aggression that he brings and the disdain of what his opponents are trying to attempt to do to him makes his opponents respect him. And that's why he's often able to just dictate the pace and continue bringing a forward pressure that not a lot of opponents can really keep up with. So That's what's made him so dangerous. That's what caused Kyler Phillips, Ricky Simon, and Said Nurmagomedov to slow down as much as they did and just allow Oliveira to dictate the pace there. But he leaves many openings that fighters who aren't intimidated by him can take advantage of. We saw Bernardo Sopai have success against him, nearly getting some finishing positions, but Oliveira's grit and toughness really pulled him through there. Here against Bautista, this is easiest the toughest opponent that Oliveira has ever gone up against. Bautista will not be threatened or intimidated by the violence that Oliveira brings because I think Bautista can match it. But also I think Bautista has the cardio edge. I think Bautista has the fight IQ edge. And I think his game planning will allow him to stay safe in most of these positions against Oliveira. Whether that's counter-striking the reckless approach of Oliveira or getting this into the clinch and grappling room where he might have a little bit of trouble early. But I think we've seen him implement it effectively against dangerous fighters in the past and pass with flying colors. And I think he can do the similar thing here against Oliveira. So this could be tight for the first 2 rounds or so. But I think the experience and the fight IQ and the game planning of Bautista will allow him to contain and muzzle Oliveira and then allow Bautista to take advantage of the questionable gas tank of Oliveira, leading to Bautista finishing Oliveira in the 4th, maybe 5th round, maybe 3rd round as well. But I think we'll see Bautista have the perfect answer to the recklessness of Oliveira, leading to Bautista getting that, I'm going to call it round 4 TKO or submission. But I think Bautista showcases his veterancy here and his overall skill advantage to get the win. So give me Mario Bautista inside the distance. There you guys go. Full UFC Vegas 113 recap there for you guys, or breakdown, I should say. I'm saying recap because that's what I'm about to get into here for this past weekend. But yeah, appreciate all the love and support. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to stick around for this past weekend's recap, you're more than welcome to. So let's quickly talk about it. I had 2 events that I bet on this weekend. One of them was Octagon 83, where we went 2-0. We cashed on Harun Kurt, who cashes at -150. Then we take a chalky square parlay on Alexander Popek, who had a complete layup there. And then Mohamed Machaev, who was able to get a nasty first-round TKO win. And we cashed 2 units there. Unfortunately, we give a unit back at UFC 325 as we have some decent wins, but there were some unfortunate hiccups. Most notably, our lock of the night play with Rafael Fiziev. He gets knocked out by Mauricio Rufy in the 2nd round of that fight. Credit to Rufy. I really talked down on him last week, and I'll wear that one on my sleeve. I really thought the hard-nosed striking style of Fiziev was going to cause Rufy problems. It seemed like Fiziev was a little bit rattled by the potential counter coming back from Rufy, and that ended up being the difference maker in the 2nd round. So we take an L on the lock of the night play. The dog of the night play does come through for us with Con Offley cashing out +184. I know there was a lot of hoopla about that being a robbery for Ija. I know it came down to that 3rd round. I thought Offley did a little bit more effective damage, even with those takedowns of Ija. Ija, you guys need to remember this. Takedowns are not weighed as heavily as they have been in the past. You need to do something with the takedown, and Ija did nothing with those takedowns. Offley almost immediately worked back to his feet. And yes, Ija landed some decent strikes, but I thought Offley was a little bit more effective earlier on in the round. Good leg kicks, good combinations of his own. So I think there is a case. It could have gone either way. I don't think it was a robbery by any means. I wouldn't have been surprised if Ija got his hand raised, but I think it is definitely closer than a lot of people are making it seem that it should have been for Ija. So happy to cash that ticket there on Con Offley. We cashed on Alexander Volkanovski, which I wish I had a little bit more confidence in, especially considering he made it look easier than their first fight. We cashed on Kiichiro Nakamura at +118. That one, I was surprised at how muzzled Nakamura was for the first 2 rounds, but luckily when he locked in that 2nd round, he eventually landed that nasty knee to get the finish there, but it wasn't looking that great. Billy Alicana cashes at -225. Kind of wish that I went with him as my lock of the night play. I felt there is a much wider difference in skill there compared to the one that I ended up going with Fiziev, but Alicana gets that 2nd round submission. Oban Elliott wasn't looking too bad until he eventually made a mistake in the grappling room and got choked out. So he took an L there. Dom Marfan, largely dominating Sung Kim. Luckily for Fan, Kim had a horrible fight IQ, especially late in that fight where he landed some big shots on Fan and then eventually clinched up with him, allowing Fan to get his wits back about him. So we still end up cashing Fan there. We end up losing on the Sulang Rangbao parlay piece along with Cam Rouston. Rouston obviously does his thing, but Su unable to really get away from the grappling of Lawrence Liu, so I'll take that L there, minus 1.33 units. We took some small sprinkles on Dan Hooker round 2 plus 1,500 and Dan Hooker round 3 plus 3,500, and he makes a bonehead move by trying to attempt a takedown on Benoit Saint-Denis in round 2, and then ultimately leads to him getting TKO'd there. So we take an L. And then the Killen Salkeld and Jamie Malarkey fight, I took the over 1.5 there for plus 120. I thought we'd see Malarkey, be a little bit safer in the grappling realm, but Salkeld just showing he is absolutely a monster to deal with, and he gets the first round submission there against Malarkey. So minus 1.02 units on UFC 325, plus about a unit on the weekend, if you take into consideration Octagon 83, but it's been a bit of a tumultuous start to the year for January, is what it is. Got to get back on the horse. We got February to tackle now in the form of UFC Vegas 113. We also got PFL going down this weekend, and we got LFA going down this weekend, which I'm hoping to cash some tickets on. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed the recap. Hope you enjoyed the breakdowns as well. I'll be back tomorrow for the live stream for this UFC Vegas 113 card. Obviously talking all relevant news in the MMA space as well, including the UFC London card being completely announced. So I can't wait to get into that about Movsar Evloev against Lauren Murphy, which is probably a number 1 featherweight contender matchup there. But we'll discuss that all tomorrow, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll be going live right here on the channel. So make sure you guys swing on through, drop your comments, questions, and concerns. That show is all about you guys. Can't wait to chop it up. All right. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm on my journey to 10,000 subscribers. Hoping to notch that by the middle of the year, but we'll see how it goes. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.